Boom. I think we're live, boys.
We are live in Atlanta, actually Smirnoff,
Smirnoff, Georgia.
Georgia.
Everything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law.
Okay.
Invoke the fifth.
Yeah.
Do it.
I should make sure we are going. I don't know. We'll find out. Yeah, somebody give us a little context, a little setup. Where the heck are we? What the heck are we doing?
Yeah, we are. First of all, we are New City Classical Academy. All of us here representing the school, and we are at the Repairing the Ruins 2024 conference. It's an annual conference for the Association for Classical and Christian Schools. So we've been going. Some of us here have been going for the past 2 years. This is our third year. We did Leaders Day today. The actual conference, main conference, starts tomorrow. So some of us did some practicums for teaching. The rest of us did some leadership stuff, just learning about head of school, board, fundraising, handling conflict, all of those different types of things were what we experienced today.
All right, so let's break down a couple of those things first. Association of Classical Christian Schools. What is that?
Association of Classical and Christian Schools is an organization that is, we would say, the leaders, I think, in the classical Christian education movement, specifically in the Quad Cities. But there, as we learned today, there's at least 3 schools outside of the United States. Did I say Quad Cities?
You did say Quad Cities.
United States. Sorry.
and you also
it's a little bigger than the Quad Cities.
And you also said QUAT, Quad Cities.
Quat? Come on. All right, back on track. We learned about 3 schools. One is in England. The other is in.
That's also not American.
What is the Republic of Congo?
Mm.
And then I forget the third.
I don't remember.
Represented in the association or represented here today?
Accredited
No,
school.
no, they're
Okay.
just schools classical Christian schools that are being started overseas.
Okay.
So outside of the United States, but the Association of Classical Christian Schools was started by Douglas Wilson and his wife Nancy, and that was 40 years ago, I believe. Of course, starting with that one school, and now is close to 500 member schools. So they are there to kind of equip schools to provide a classical and Christian education. So they have this annual conference every single year to that end. David Goodwin is the current president of Association for Classical Christian Schools, also known as ACCS. And he said, when he spoke for maybe 5 minutes today just to kind of intro everything, he said, of course, you're here to learn, right? You're here to grow, but it's also what we do is it's tough, and it can be exhausting. So this is also, we want you guys to just rest and enjoy after working hard throughout the year to come here, be with other like-minded people who are doing the same thing, trying to do the same thing as you. We want you to really just have fellowship and rest and enjoy your time. Like I said, in Atlanta this year. So that's the Association for Classical and Christian Schools.
Sam, you want to give us a real brief, high-level definition of classical Christian schools?
Sure. Well, let's start with Christian. I think that's the most important part. There are a couple different approaches to Christian education. There is your, I would say what's most popular, or people are probably most familiar with, is something a little bit better than a public school education, where the format is pretty much borrowed, and then you add in a Bible class or something to make it Christian. Maybe there's a chapel. Maybe there's more. There's probably more distinguishing factors that make it Christian. One of the unique things specific about ACCS is that they want to integrate. Will show that Christ is the center of all wisdom, all knowledge. It all comes back to Him. So we're helping our children develop a Christian worldview. A way to understand the sciences, a way to understand math, a way to understand art, literature, from top to bottom, front to back, all the way through, to understand how Christ connects to everything and develop worldview thinkers. And so having a thoroughly Christian education is part of the classical Christian model, and then classical is a pedagogy. It's a format of education that is borrowed from really, I think, the medieval times. So all of the founders essentially had a classical education, founders of our country,
Okay.
that helped them shape their worldview. It was influenced by Christian values. Virtue is a big thing, and so the whole model. We take the classical part. There's typically broken up into, at least in the this age demographic. You have the trivium, so you have the grammar school. And all of this is meant to work with the grain of a child's development. So you have the grammar school that's really setting out the building blocks for education. So the basics of learning, then you move into logic. You start learning how things fit together. And then rhetoric is you start developing your own ideas and learning how to defend those and to do it in a persuasive manner. And so all this is happening while developing virtue and character. And so when you take these things, it's just not learning or accumulating information. The point is to develop well-rounded and virtuous human beings that will contribute to society, more than just getting a job and entering into the workforce, but really shaping culture and seeing to the advancement. Really, what we're talking about is the advancement of the kingdom of heaven. So that's kind of the big picture of what's going on there.
Yeah. So where you started there was you painted this picture of what we might think of if we think Christian school. It's a school. You're going to learn math. And math has its own principles that are essentially neutral, right?
Sure.
Morally neutral.
Uh-huh.
Science may have its own principles that are morally neutral. Same with grammar, literature, all of these things. But if we believe Solomon, if we believe that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, there's a foundational shift that happens when we learn anything. Any of those subjects are foundationally different with that understanding.
Yeah. You say it seems to be neutral, and one of the things that developing a Christian worldview is you understand that there is no neutrality.
Right.
Everything is grounded in some kind of religion. It's just a matter of what religion is it.
Mm-hmm.
And because we believe Christianity is true and God is real, the Bible is absolute truth, we take God at his word and we apply that across every spectrum of learning and understanding human existence even.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so Alex did a great job kind of setting up, the Repairing the Ruins Conference is the yearly conference put on by the Association of Classical Christian Schools, and that a handful of us, this is our third time being here. So, John, this is your third time being here. What brought you here the first time?
Oh, I think it was.
Your wife?
No. Yes. No. It was a broader question. It was a search for something different, essentially. But I was introduced to it by Mary, by you all, and Rob Spikester actually, because I think the first time I had the pedagogy introduced me was at Sacred City by Rob Spikestra announcing what Morningstar was doing. And so there was discussion of classical Christian in the trivium and the quadrivium, and so there were these different components that were introduced, and then the seed was planted in my mind at that point. And from there, then there's a fairly conventional path. I mean, you're looking at some of the literature of Douglas Wilson. You're looking at Recovering the Lost Tools of Learning, case for classical Christian education. It's a similar set of first steps, and all starting with Dorothy Sayers' essay, "The Lost Tools of Learning," and so I think that's how I was introduced to it. I did not know what to expect 3 years ago, and especially because I feel like Doug Wilson talks about this. You have this vision in your head of a Christian school, and it's essentially a little bit of Bible sprinkled on top of it and warmed up a little bit. But when you come to ACCS, you see that it's much more than that. Obviously, it's the whole of it. You mentioned math earlier, math and science. Well, classical Christian education would say that math and science are really logic. They are the rules of logic with numbers, with characters. And so you begin to see this knowledge that coheres when you acknowledge God, and then you have this coherence, and that is taught or embedded in students through classical Christian education.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, Doug Wilson said one time when he was asked the question of, we understand a Christian education, but why classical education? He said, we use the classical model so that our Christianity gets more than 1 inch deep. Meaning, again, you can just say you're a Christian, you can say you're a Christian school, you can be about, the children in your school's salvation, which is great. Those are all good things. But to be able to actually pass on the Christian worldview to the next generation, then that takes a certain type of education. And that's where, the classical model, going all the way back to, so part of what classical means is just really old, right? So it goes all the way back to Greco-Roman times of just how they developed education, and they were specifically trying to pass their culture on to the next generation, right? So, if you're a Greek father, you wanted to pass on what it meant to be a Greek onto your children. So everything in that environment was meant, in the family environment, how they interacted, in their community, was meant to, this is how Greeks live, this is how Greeks function, and we want that to continue, and we want it to be something that's really good for not only an individual or a collective group as known as the family, but also something that's good for the whole city. They knew if their city was going to continue to thrive, if their civilization was going to continue to thrive, then their way of life had to be passed on. So that was developed a long time ago, and of course it's been refined and added to and improved. It's matured throughout history. But then when Christianity comes in, and you look back to what Paul says is, fathers are directly charged to raise their children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And the Greek word there is paideia, which is what the Greeks were trying to do. They were trying to pass the paideia on. So what Paul tells us as fathers to do is to pass the paideia of the Lord onto our children. So that's to me the most significant part, the most beautiful part of a classical Christian education is it's been tested, it's lasted throughout history, and it seems to be the best way to pass on the paideia of the Lord, the way of the Lord, the Christian worldview, knowing Jesus, following Jesus, loving Jesus, obeying Jesus for all of life. That is, we would know that as discipleship, of course, educating your children from, all the way through their school years. God's going to bless that, right, as they move on from that phase of life. So yeah, that's we kind of knew some of that before we went to that Repairing the Ruins conference a couple years ago, but that was really when I think we kind of fully knew what the classical Christian education was about, just what we were hearing that weekend.
Yeah, I would say even more than just we knew that, we believed that to be true. We were convicted that this was right and good and beautiful.
Yeah.
And maybe just didn't quite have the imagination of what this would look like.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And for me, again, it's one thing to see that and be like, okay, I want that for my kids, which is absolutely what I wanted, and we didn't think we were getting that for our kids. So, just starting a school for that, or just going back and homeschooling our children in this way would have been good enough. But to see, especially Doug Wilson, because he opened up the conference that year, and he's opened up the conference every year that we've been there, is he's painting a bigger picture, a bigger vision for the classical Christian education movement than just the best way of educating your children, right? We are in a culture war right now, right? The current state of the United States specifically, but really the whole world, the culture is going south, right? He calls it clown world. So there has to be something that pushes back against that darkness. And of course we need to be doing that as adults, but raising our children up to prepare them to not just go out into that culture and survive, but actually to be able to go out into that culture and be dangerous to it, to be the ones who can push back against that darkness that's happening but also be able to be persuasive with their worldview, so that when they're coming up against these people who have a different worldview, it's not just, it's a neutral thing. They can have their worldview and I can have my own. They're actually be able to be persuasive with their worldview to hopefully God would bless that. God would use that to convert, or what Jesus tells us to do, which is disciple the nations.
Mhm.
We're trying to raise up a generation, which then would raise up the next generation and on, so on, to disciple the nations.
Yeah. So if I were to summarize all the sentiments of what all three of you just said, it would be that the culture of being a Christian stretches far beyond our soteriology alone. And this is a systematic way to really grow and build a sustainable culture of passing that on to future generations.
Mhm.
Yep.
Very cool. So we're here. This is day one. They call it Leaders Day. Is that the
Yep.
correct title? Not all of us attended. Andy and I celebrated his birthday and watched some baseball.
Go Braves.
So for you guys, what happened today? What are you taking away from today?
Yeah, so just a number of seminars discussing or approaching a classical Christian school from a board member perspective, from a headmaster perspective, and a dean, yes, our dean of discipleship. But there's a lot of what was discussed today were learnings from people who have started a school and done it well. And then there's also the strategic planning side of it, the forward-looking aspect of it. Okay, so you started a school, now what? And so, yeah, I mean, there's the topics today go from academic all the way down to the practical.
Yeah.
You gentlemen did a seminar this morning that was on dealing with conflict, and there were very specific hypotheticals. And then we had several hours in the afternoon discussing school choice, and ESAs and vouchers, and what, and not only what they mean, but how to deal with them, and then how others have dealt with them as well. So, I mean, it's a deep dive for people in administration and leadership of the school to learn from one another.
Yeah, so we know that where there is a lack of vision, people perish. And so it seems like today was one of those days, and really this whole thing is kind of centered around let's keep the vision right out in front. So from before getting into maybe some of the more practical stuff, and probably even get Kevin in for some of that stuff, what kind of things did you grab onto today, kind of in that regard of, okay, only one of the three of you were in a classroom this past year, right?
Mhm.
But you all found it extremely valuable to be here, even for today, right?
Mhm.
So from that framework, why is something like today important?
Yeah, I think so. Ben Merkel, who I don't know if they call him is it just the president of New St. Andrews College out in Moscow, Idaho. So Doug Wilson that we mentioned before started the first of this kind of renewal or resurgence of classical Christian education schools, and then they started a university or a college called New St. Andrews, and then his son-in-law Ben Merkel is the president of that. So he was the first speaker today, and he just kind of talked about when you're leading something this important, which he claimed that he thinks the biggest win for cultural advancement is the K through 12 institution of what's been happening with the ACCS movement of so many K through 12 schools coming to fruition. And he thinks that's the biggest win for cultural advancement of what in the Christian, for Christianity, I guess. So he just talked about when something is that significant, there's always going to be conflict. There's always going to be things that want to push back against what you're doing.
So why is it? Why is K through 12 education that important?
Well, I mean, I think it's important, but I just think it is something that's just clearly you can point to, right? So there's this thought of culture's going so bad as Christians, we should just let it be, right? Let it go. There's nothing we can do anyway. We have no power against it. So culture is just going to continue to go downhill, or we can actually get to work and start doing something.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's just an example of Christians getting to work, right? Where they're starting something that, you might not even be able to see, especially when you're in it during the school, whether you've been doing it for 1 year or 20 years, you might not be able to see clearly that, hey, this is actually pushing back against the darkness of the culture currently. But that is exactly what it's doing. So just the fact that they're happening, I think, is a clear sign that, oh, wait, yes, culture seems to be going south, but here is also this movement that is a significant positive thing within Christianity that you can point to that says, okay, we're not the fat lady hasn't sung, I guess you could say, right? It's still not over. We can still move in the right direction and turn things around.
Yeah, to add on that, stealing from a different session, happened later in the day. One of the presenters was talking about what are the contributing ingredients to a student's, maintaining faithfulness to the Lord throughout their life. And he talked about how first, family is the most important. God gives parents the responsibility to see to the development, discipleship of their child, that being sort of the core. He talked about it's important to be in a local church and to be engaged, to be a member in good standing at a local church. That being a factor. He talked about the need for like-minded peers, so friends that are good friends that are actually going to, iron sharpen iron and not be counterproductive. And the need for good mentors, people who are a generation ahead that can invest. And another aspect of that is school. And one of the unique things about school is how it ties all of these things together. And so they brought a presenter up, a recent graduate who shared some anecdotal stories about how it wasn't until he got into the rhetoric school at a classical Christian school where the conversations around schooling and the stuff that they were learning actually enhanced the conversations at the dinner table. It actually provided a framework for better conversations with his friends. His friends are sitting at the lunch table talking about Bible, mentors are readily available, whether it be teachers or whatever the case might be, or alum that come back and invest. And so school has provided this infrastructure where all of those things are maximized so that faithfulness from one student will, and it won't just be a flash in the pan, which I think is a real epidemic with where Christianity is at, where you tend to see kids grow up and be excited about Jesus, and then they slowly fade away. And maybe the Lord will bring them back, but one of the things that we want to see, what my prayer for is for my kids is they have the most boring testimony in the world.
Yeah.
Grew up in the church. I learned the catechism. I believe there never a moment that I didn't believe Jesus was Lord. I stumbled my way through that, and I learned I was sanctified through it. But to have that faithfulness instilled, and then they don't actually have to make a regression in order to leap forward. I think typically we're captivated by those stories that massive apostasy, and then God brings them back. It's like, well, yeah, we want that for those who apostatize, but it'd be great if there was no apostasy in the first place. So, to have a school provide some sort of a framework where those conversations are driven, like you said earlier, deeper than just an inch deep, but all the way down.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the reasons why this kind of school is so powerful for not just the education, but for the discipleship of kids that will be the next leaders.
Yeah.
Yeah, because those elements you just listed off, those speak way more to this culture than they do curriculum, right?
Mm-hmm.
Curriculum is a very important piece. We're going to teach truth. We're going to teach goodness and beauty, but those impactful pieces are actually how that truth is now worked in,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's no compartmentalism going on. It's all the way through.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I would piggyback on that. I think the framework and the system that you can't help but feel when you're in participating in ACCS is incredibly humbling. But then it empowers you. Like it takes disparate topics and subjects and coheres them. And I've used that word twice now because I feel like, though, that's one thing that's missing if you're looking at culture, is that, we're quick to break things down into individual topics and nothing's related to one another and there's no interrelationships. But what classical Christian education does is it allows for an ordered understanding and an ordered coherence, and that is incredibly powerful for students. Like they can then be in right relationship with God, acknowledging where they stand, and make sense of it all.
Yeah.
It's you can boil a lot of this down to that that one concept, and then that will serve them well throughout the rest of their life. It'll go well with them.
Yeah.
Okay, so I kind of interrupted you from why K-12 matters so much.
Yeah.
Keep going with where you're at.
Yeah, I was saying. So he was going through. Anytime you're doing something significant like that, there's going to be conflict in it. It's just an easy way for the enemy to step in and say, okay, here's something really good that's happening. Let me try to get in here and do something to mess it up. So that can be infighting within your organization. It could be people from the outside because you obviously start to make an impact with your organization, so they want to come in and ruin it. So he just gave a picture of what it looks like to lead in tough times, in times that there's going to be conflict, there's going to be ambiguity, all of those things. But one of the I think probably the most significant thing that I heard him say is he said, beware of the instinct to be safe rather than being right. Many people do things because they're defensible, even though they're not right. Meaning, you might instinctually, you might see something and see, okay, this is the right decision to make, but you already start to think about all the different things that could, you could lose people, you could lose your job, right? You could get in trouble, whatever. The media could blast you, all these different things. So you might as well make it a safer decision, because then you could justify. If it ends up being the wrong decision, you now can easily defend it because it didn't have much risk to it. But in reality, that might be the absolute wrong decision to make. Something might be right, but it might be, you should still be able to defend why you chose to make that decision, but it might be a lot more difficult, and there might be a lot more risk in making that decision. Basically, he's saying these are leaders over here; these are not leaders over here. If they could be considered a leader, this is a very weak leadership over here. And this movement, with how significant what's happening with these schools is, it's not going to last if there's a bunch of weak leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I part of that conversation too. I mean, we talk about classical Christian education as a means to sanctify our children and have them grow up in the faith. The way that he was talking about dealing with crisis from a leadership perspective had a lot to do with our own sanctification,
Right.
what God's doing
Absolutely.
in our lives as we grow and develop. And there's a way that how you handle that, how you handle crisis or conflict or whatever, typical negative situation. When people see you suffering well, when people see you enduring, doing the right thing instead of, the fleshly thing, you're setting an example that I think really goes a long way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge. Do you have more from him, or do you guys have more from him?
No.
Yeah, you were in that one, weren't you?
No, I had to step out. I had to
Oh yeah,
take a
you took a work
call.
call. No, I mean he was good. I mean, most of it again was just kind of pointing us back to this is what strong leaders. So he, he was honest too. He taught us from here's some things that we've done or decisions even that he's made personally that have went well, but also I've made a lot of dumb decisions and poor decisions that I've looked back and now I'm telling you not to make those decisions. But then also just kind of what goes through his own head when he gets. What did he say? He said he feels like he's the punching bag or something for
The complaint box.
the complaint box. So anything, he's the president of New St. Andrews. Of course, he's involved with the Wilson family, but it just seems like anything that happens from Christ Church or anything that happens from Wilson family, anything maybe even having that Logos somehow, Ben Merkel gets this, and he could very easily just be complaining about that, or he can take some level of ownership of it and
Right.
actually address it
Mhm.
like a strong leader. So.
Yeah, that's good. So anything else from the leadership and vision side of stuff from today?
I think that another woman did a talk on she did her dissertation on what leads to burnout within your organization, specifically for teachers. I think she was talking about, because again, this is tough. It's different. Not too many people have too much experience with teaching, in a classical Christian way. But it also is just tough work in general, even if you have all the experience, because it's new for students, it's new for families, it's a rigorous education, so it could very easily just lead to burnout. So she did her dissertation on the spectrum of burnout versus engagement. So those are just opposite ends of the spectrum, and then these 6 areas within the job, and which area was the most significant piece of keeping somebody from burning out. And it just came down to being aligned with the values of the organization. So if your values are in alignment with the organization's values, then that's going to keep you emotionally healthy. That's going to keep you connected with who you're doing it with, and you're going to be effective, which are the 3 main things that how she defined whether you're burnout or effective or engaged is, whether you're effective, connected, and emotionally healthy. So just being able, as leaders then, being able to cast the vision, be able to, state our values and just over communicate what those are so that it gets down into the everyday of what they're doing. That's going to prevent, people from getting to where there's lack of engagement or even all the way into burnout.
Right. So what you're saying there is, this is going to be hard.
It's going to be hard.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, plenty of times we heard today is if you're this, you shouldn't start a school. If you're not
Mhm.
this, you shouldn't start a school.
right. And so that is true. It's going to be hard. And in order to do something hard, you need to understand why,
Yeah, got to have a why. Got to have a purpose.
right?
But you got to have it, but then you also have to be constantly reminded
Sure.
of it, right? And
Right.
you have to be able to say, okay, I understand this high level purpose, vision up here, but what does that mean for every day? How does it inform what I do, every class period, or, how I interact with students, how I interact with families, every email that I send out, those type of things.
Yeah. So like, the reason I kind of go there with it is really just to draw this parallel to, okay, this is within the context of teaching and building schools. But if we just look at that person as a human being, and specifically as a Christian, like, what do you say to any Christian? Maybe we should talk to the counselor here. What do you say to any Christian experiencing what they may be calling burnout, or what you're seeing as something we classify as burnout? Like, Kev, what questions are you asking that person?
I mean,
Eat the mic.
oh yeah, sorry guys. A lot of times, so folks facing burnout, it's kind of well, I mean, in any Christian institution, and maybe this isn't the direction you're looking to go, but any Christian institution, a lot of times, the busyness of that, the first things to go can be our spiritual disciplines, right? And so if somebody feels like they're burned out, then I'm going straight towards, hey, what are you doing? Like, are you still in Scripture? Are you still in prayer? And I'd say 8 to 9 times out of 10, it's, yeah, well, I teach at a Christian school, and so a lot of my devotional time, that's actually like prepping for class. It's like, well, actually, these are 2 different categories of
Mhm.
things.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and so to try to connect those 2 things, I think as Christians, and you referenced it earlier, the Christian life is about so much more than just are we going to heaven when we leave this particular earth. It's about obedience to God. So in our assembly this past year, a question that we asked the kids every single day is, why are we in school today? right? And they said to glorify and enjoy God. So if we can remember that, then whatever it is, whether it's easy or difficult, now it's just, that's not going to lead to burnout.
Right.
At least we're putting up a hedge of protection against leading to burnout. So reading scriptures, being in prayer, spending time with the Lord, meditating on scripture, memorizing scripture, all that is reminding you of who God is, what he's like, who he is for you, your relationship to him, all of those things. When you disconnect yourself from that, from reading the Bible, praying, you're disconnecting yourself from the Lord in a sense, but you're also disconnecting yourself from the purpose that he's given you.
Right.
Yeah.
The vision.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So I love that. That's where you went, because the spiritual disciplines are like they are this trellis for us to grow on. Right. They are
Right.
this support that we need. Otherwise, we're growing wild in the dirt, and without the without the liturgy, without the gathering, without the worship, without the hearing of the word of God, without the confession of sin, right? Without the absolution, without the rest.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. This is you and your own strength, and this is going to end poorly.
Well, I'd be interested. Maybe they didn't get into that, and that's fine. But how often are people burned out because there's a lot of work, or are people burned out because of feelings, right? I don't feel like this is fun, or I don't feel like I'm getting rewarded by these things that are going on.
Yep. So there was 6 areas of their work. So one was workload, right? So just amount of hours, types of tasks, emotional capacity. So, which is true, right? If you were the only one teaching every single class, you woke up at 4 a.m., went to bed at 2 a.m., right? That's just workload is going to be too much for anybody at some point.
Sure.
The second one was community. Like, are you actually being supported in the community? Like, do you have administrative support? Do you have, is there actually a community within the faculty and staff, just the school community? One was control. So can you, how much freedom do you have in how you do things?
Sure.
And then, but also just like a mastery over what you're trying to do, mastery over the curriculum, mastering over, your rhythms of class, all that type of stuff. And then the values, which is the one that ended up being the most significant, but that's your goals, your beliefs, your passions. Fairness was another one. So this is similar to the workload one, but this is distribution of workload. So if you're, teaching 5 classes and I'm only teaching 1, but, we're both seen as, we're both praised the same, or there's the same significance, all that type of stuff, then that's, somebody could see that as unfair.
Sure.
And then the last one was rewards. That could, of course, be monetary rewards or affirming that they're doing well, encouragement, all that type of stuff, praise, those type of things. So I think some of that is subjective, right? Some of that is just your own. How are you doing emotionally?
Sure.
But some of it's also, I would say, some objectivity to it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and language that we use often that I think all of this falls under is these are all gospel issues,
Yeah.
right? These are all issues that find their true end and find their true resolution in the good news, right?
Yep.
And if this thing is not separate from that, in the same way that the actual education is not separate from it, the way that the facilitators of this thing go about that is no different.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And so the way that we want to lead the people who are leading this institution is in that same way.
Yeah, I mean, that's in one sense, everything is a gospel issue. Like when you get down to it, if somebody was actually believing the gospel, then there wouldn't be some of these things. But I also just think how God has shaped us, right? He's the one that knows our frame, and he's given us all a different frame. So we all are going to have different capacities,
Sure.
right? We're going to have different levels of how much workload we can take on, the type of relationships that we need, how much connectedness do we need, all of those type of things. So I think it's up to us as, the leaders of the school to be able to know our people, right? Know the people that are actually working at the school, and try to be proactive, get ahead of a lot of this stuff But that's also the beauty of what we're trying to do in not only partnering with families who are in alignment with who we are theologically, with what we, the philosophy of education that we have, but anybody that we hire, we also want to be in alignment with what we're doing. But they also have to be Christian and have to be living a Christian life, having Christian rhythm. So they have to be part of a church, right? We know their pastors. We can ask their pastors how they're doing, and that's a part of, I think, getting ahead of a lot of this stuff. If we're able to see somebody leading towards burnout, not only should we be addressing that in some way, in any way that we can as leaders of the school, but we also can get church involved, family involved, those type of things. That's back to that three-legged stool.
Yeah. So it's like there's a reality where even with your teachers, for example, a part of them doing their job well and growing in excellence is a pretty direct correlate to their own sanctification.
Yeah.
Right. And the school is not the church.
Right.
Right. And it requires that other support, that other domain that the church would be responsible for, and the home would be responsible for, that these things cannot thrive individually.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, we when we're hiring or admitting, we ask that parents and students and teachers agree to that in writing.
Yeah.
Even it's not just something on our lips or some ambition. It's tangible. Like we're asking, are you faithfully attending a church? We're asking for your pastor, a reference, and there's a lot of, we're not doing that to, as you say, step in place of the church. It's not that at all.
No.
But
It's the same thing as one teacher trying to run the whole thing and do the whole thing by themselves. Like you describe what that might look like and how unsustainable that's going to be. If this truly is a culture war that we're in, like this is a massive endeavor that's going to take the body.
Yeah.
And just like there's a body that makes up the school, there's a body of spheres of institutions that require each other to be effective.
Yeah. Yep.
Do you have something there? Great.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other things, this is kind of changing gears a little bit, but one of the other talks we listened to was, I forget what the title of the talk, but basically he talked about fundraising. And he had mentioned his first year being part of the school. He was in charge of fundraising, and they gave him the job of, hey, we need $80,000 this year, which he thought was, there's just no way that's going to happen. I don't know how to fundraise. I've never fundraised, and you're expecting me to raise $80,000 for this upcoming school year. I don't even know what I'm doing. But God provided, and God provided exactly $80,000 that year for that school. Now, 30-some years later, he's still involved in that with the school, but they just had to raise $10 million for the school needs. And, I'm sure he's kind of thinking same thing, right? Of, man, $10 million, that's a ridiculous amount of money. How are we going to raise that for the school? But he can look back, and this is going back to the Ben Merkel talk. He said, anytime you're in something that is difficult and you're doubting that God can actually move, God is going to provide, is you should have already a list of about 5 things in your head of when God has provided.
Yeah.
And then you can just very easily you can take a walk, you can be in prayer and ask God to bring those things to your mind. And now it's not just, God can provide, because we know that, that's what Scripture would teach. But not only do you know that's what Scripture teaches, but you've also had that experience, in your past, and God can bring that to your memory. And then now you have what you need to move forward in faith to go do what you're supposed to do.
It would also be interesting to have somebody like David Monson tomorrow look at the $80,000 30 years ago and actually say, well, compared to today.
Oh yeah,
that
probably was still even more than 80 now, right?
Yeah, that would have been a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah.
Sammy?
Yeah, it's just cool to see. It's just cool to see that the schools that started similar to us, of they had 14 kids or they had 20 kids or whatever, and now they're 500 or they're 800 or 20 years down the road, because none of them are very old. Like again,
Right.
40 years or so. This
Mhm.
is when it all started. So
Right. At most, we're talking about a couple like life cycles of a K-12 student.
Mhm.
right,
Right.
right, yep. And it's just they're thriving.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it's cool.
Sam, you just are thumbing through your notes over there. Wondering if you're looking for something.
Yeah, no, I'm not looking for anything specific. There's just a lot of content, and some of it,
Mhm.
it's like this would have been really good to know 2 years ago, or this would have been really good to know 10 years ago. Just a lot of great stuff going on here.
Mhm.
And I'm sure over the next few days, probably hear a lot of this stuff over again, and it'll be just as good the second, third, and fourth time you hear it. So.
Right. What's the thing? God doesn't take you from where you should have been. Takes you from where you are.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
The conversation on school choice is quite remarkable to me, because 3 years ago, I think we heard it mentioned in passing,
Yep.
and I think the general reception from everyone at the conference was, terrible idea, don't even consider it. And I think ACCS at that time still had a 20%. One of their requirements of accreditation was that you could have
No
more than 20% from a single source of funding. From what I understood, is it was pretty rigidly adhered to, like that you needed to do this. And then the year subsequent, so 2023 in Pittsburgh, it seemed like that there was a little bit of a reconsideration on that point. And then this year, I feel like there's much more dialogue. Now, if you were to ask me personally where I stand, I very much do believe it is shekels for shackles.
Sure.
And that's how it was described today, is that you are receiving the shekels, and in turn you are getting the shackles. I'm not, having gone through the accreditation process and seen what states and the Department of Education of these states are asking people to do, there are a lot of strings attached. But I think where we're at now, I think people are sensing the decline of, and I've heard it referred to by fellow board members as plundering the Egyptians.
Yeah.
But there is very much that sense among people at the conference, and that that the circumstances have changed.
Sure.
You need to be fully cognizant of what you're doing, and not blindly accepting government money. And ACCS will ask you to have a plan and the ability and capability of leaving
Right.
money on the table.
Right. So tease that out a little bit. What kind of guardrails are you setting up to say, hey, we are not going to be vulnerable to that?
Yeah. So you see, I think the entry stage to that is, asking parents to have skin in the game, and as a way of building up your reserves and encouraging parents to be committed to the school, not just simply dropping their kids off and having fully paid for. And so that's I think the entry that you see a lot of people taking, like, hey, we need to have parents with skin in the game. But then you start to see more sophisticated approaches, like we saw today, where you have schools that are essentially creating endowments, and the endowment, accessing the funds of the endowment is predicated on you not taking any government money, so stepping away from the ESAs. And so, that's an elaborate, instrument to protect for and to, improve your vulnerability, or reduce your vulnerability, to government funding. So you're seeing those approaches. I think there's more. I think there are other approaches that may work down the road that, and one of the things we see is most of the schools are raising or are setting the tuition above the ESA or voucher amount,
Sure.
Whatever the program is, and that's a way of having skin in the game. But I think our approaches will be more nuanced and varied as time goes along, meaning multiple strategies for dealing with it. And I don't see necessarily ACCS or the members of this conference, losing sight of what is actually happening, and meaning the government funds going to the school and then the strings that come along with it. I don't think that's going to change. I just think that I think that the people are, the attendees of the conference and ACCS seem to want to take advantage and not have schools that are so far behind everybody else in the area. So that they're proactive on that point.
Yeah, it was interesting to see the different perspectives. So they had a headmaster from Florida, school in Florida, who has an ESA program, and then a headmaster from a school in Arizona who has an ESA program. The guy from Florida is, pretty pessimistic about ESA sticking around. He just assumes that there's going to be more strings as they go on. So that's the school that talked about having an endowment, so taking a percentage of the revenue that they're bringing in and putting it into this endowment, and then a lot of the money that they're raising, instead of raising it for a capital campaign or something like that, that's also going into the endowment. So now they're prepared when they do go away. Now they have a bunch of money that they can give tuition assistance with. But then the school in Arizona, who's been doing it for 20 some years, the approach that they take is they're just getting heavily involved with lobbying and at the Capitol and trying to be involved with the legislation as much as they can, and just fighting to keep it, which the woman that presented on the ESAs and the benefit of them, she said that they're building up a pretty big pool of kids across the country who are using these ESAs, and the bigger that pool gets, the more difficult it is going to be, regardless of who's in power, to overturn it. And I think she said it's about 70,000 kids right now, which apparently is big enough for anybody who gets into office to say.
Over only a couple states.
Well, they showed
One
it's
state. Arizona. It was just Arizona. It was
Those 70,000 were
70,000, and then there was another 40,000 in a different government program. So there's 110,000 plus children or families. I don't know quite the way they worded it, but let's just say it's children that are taking some form, because Arizona has different programs. There's a tax credit program, and there's an ESA. And so there's a lot of people.
Yeah. No, there's actually, I forget how many, but I want to say it was 15 to 20 states who have some type of a school choice program.
I think it's 14.
14?
I think.
Wow.
Yep. And Louisiana was just today. They
Just
passed
passed.
it today.
Yeah.
Yep. They think Tennessee is going to be next.
Texas.
So Texas?
Yeah.
Both.
I thought Tennessee already had it.
No, so Tennessee's have it. They want Texas. If they can get Texas, it makes it 40%
Okay.
of something.
Well,
What
I
that
think it was.
Lots of numbers today.
I think it was 40% of students across the country.
40% of students across the country.
They're I think it was Lindsey Burke from the Heritage Foundation was saying, if Texas joins, they'll have 40% of all students across the country taking some form of ESA.
Yeah.
Or eligible.
So that would be pretty significant, again, increasing that pool of how many kids have it across the country. So yeah, that's just two different perspectives, where Florida's like, we're trying to stay out of it. We want to keep it quiet. We're going to receive it. We're going to plunder Egyptians, because we see this as 7 years of plenty. But we also know there's going to be 7 years of famine coming after this, back to the story of Joseph and Book of Genesis. So that's how they see it, where these other guys are like, no, let's get highly involved and fight for it so that they don't go away. So, I mean, I don't know. I would probably fall down on this side right now, but the more I think about it, and the guy from Arizona I thought was he made a good argument, and why not? Why not fight for it? Why not only fight for them to stay, but continue to fight for no more strings to be attached, right?
Yeah.
For the strings to not increase.
Another layer of that conversation was showing just how inefficient public school education was.
Oh my goodness, I forgot about that.
Massive.
It was like, what was it? The number was close to maybe $19,000
$19,000
per student, because in the public school system there's just so much non-teacher personnel. It's really thick in the mid-administrative level. So I think they said it used to be, I don't know what the time frame was, it used to be for every 2.3 teachers or 2 or 3 teachers, there was one non-teaching personnel. and now it's almost a 1-for-1. So
Yep.
for every one teacher, you've got an administrator, which
Yeah.
if you think about it, that just doesn't work economically.
Right.
It's not a good way to educate a lot of children.
Yeah.
And so you're spending. So this is what's interesting. Public school, you're spending about $19,000 per student. Most ESAs come in somewhere between $65,000 to $8,000 per student, and that's what's running many schools, or at least contributing to a large chunk financially to make these things afloat. Which just think of the efficiency when you're that close to the organization, when you're just embedded. So we're talking about parent buy-in was one of the things John just mentioned. It's like when you're really committed to this thing, and it's on multiple levels because it's something that you built up. It's like people built this from the ground. It's committed to a different a philosophy, a different approach to education. It's thoroughly Christian.
Yeah.
There's good reason to be invested in it, and then you see it's a bargain,
Mhm.
compared to public school education.
Right.
It's incredible.
Well, because she also said that since the 70s, and I think this was 2012, was it later than that? Somewhere around there, that spending had increased 130%.
192%.
192% spending has increased.
Yeah.
In proficiency in math and reading had increased only 2%
It's
in that same time frame.
statistically insignificant.
Right.
Is what that's called. You have 192% increase in expenses spending, and then 2% increase in math scores, and then a 0.7% increase in reading scores.
Crazy.
Yeah. So all of this.
And that's the 70s, right?
Yeah.
That's still 50 years of progressive education.
Right.
From 1920 to 1970. Think back if they compared them to people that were
Sure.
classically educated,
Mhm.
where it would be at.
Yeah.
And
So-
it's interesting too because the chart that John was just referencing caps out at the 2010s. So you're not even factoring in
Oh my gosh.
the last
COVID year and all
14
that.
years.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Well, and
Yeah.
you have these schools over the last 4 years since COVID that have been padding their cash and reserves with COVID money from the government, federal government, basically subsidizing schools.
$160 billion or something.
Yeah,
like
I mean, their inefficiency is rewarded at this point.
Right.
I mean, they have lots of money from the government. It was supposed to be earmarked for certain expenditures, but we don't really know what they actually did use it for. And yeah, I mean, you have no results to back it up.
Sure. Yeah. Right. So we've kind of drifted into this realm of the economics of the thing, and the bottom line reality is we are so far from what we would say is ideal and certainly biblical that it's another situation where this principle of the smash mouth incrementalism is like we have to apply that. We have to be honest with where we're at and take small steps towards what is a much more sustainable future.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. And that's back to the significance of the movement, right? The bigger the more classical Christian schools there are, the bigger these classical Christian schools become. That's a way of pushing back against this
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's good. All right. So, Kev, you sat through kind of totally different. Jeez, all three of you are just leaving here. You sat through. Everything you were doing was if they were up in the clouds, you were down in the dirt, right? You were boots on the ground, with the most hands-on student-facing elements of the school are what happens teacher to student every minute of every day, right?
Sure.
Tell us about some of the stuff that you did today. Eat the mic. On the lips, baby.
I'm used to having a stand mic on the other podcast.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. New experiences, So I did. I sat through a practicum on teaching literature. It was teaching literature for beginners, and so this guy, I can't remember his name. He was super passionate about lit. He taught it for something like 19 years, and basically talked about how his goal in teaching literature, right, in teaching the good, the true, and the beautiful is not necessarily to get students to be experts in the great books, but to get them exposure to the ideas and really chopping up these ideas, getting into it. And so the way that he approaches that is, he said that basically every class period for 19 years, he just stands up in front of the class. He reads reads the story chapter by chapter out loud for the class period, and just kind of exposits the themes and leads through a conversation. So kind of I'd say kind of a traditional Socratic method.
It sounds too good to be true,
It does.
right?
It'd be hard for sure. It'd be hard. And there's, he'd said there's trade-offs, you're not getting through 15, 20 books a year,
Mm-hmm.
but, kind of his goal is to get students who love
Right.
the books, who love the standard.
Right. Like going back to what is the goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is the goal to get through a certain set of curriculum, or is the goal to shape the affections of the student?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Practical elements you're taking away from that?
Practical elements. I mean, just again,
Just ditch all your
so-
lesson plans.
No, not ditch all the lesson plans. There's definitely room for some tweaks. Me personally, as a teacher, reading out loud isn't my favorite thing to do, and so sitting through this and realizing, hey, there's probably going to be a strong element of dying to myself next year for ultimately for the betterment of the students, the betterment of the class, and I'm perfectly okay with that. But I was sitting there, I was like, man, that seems like a lot of reading, but the other piece, kind of towards the end, he did a practical writing assignment, so I'll be teaching English as well this year, where he asked us to take the argument from one of the chapters that he read to us, and just summarize that in 3 words, and then 6, 12, 24, and 48. And kind of the point is, as you're learning to write, right, wanting to be really particular about your word choice, right, not being wordy for the sake of being wordy, but to know kind of, hey, this is what I'm saying, this is why I'm saying it. This is not something I excel at either.
Mm.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Kevin, what kind of critiques did you have from the audience, or I don't know if this instructor even opened it up? What kind of pushback did you hear from the audience on this guy's method?
So a lot of it was more practical. It was more, so I mentioned the only getting through 4 or 5 books a year. Somebody asked, well, what about, like the school gives us a reading list, and he basically said, hey, just tell them up front. Like if you have the school that will allow you to do it, just talk to the school up front and be like, hey, we're not going to get through 12 to 15 books this year. It's going to be 4 to 5 good books.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. And then he said, is regarding the writing piece, he didn't get a lot of pushback for this, but the importance of setting the standard for good writing, right, in these kind of summaries, and so not being afraid to just completely, obviously speaking the truth in love, right, but to completely butcher as students waste words on these things, because you can have a summary in 6 words and you only need 4 words,
Mm-hmm.
and so just to not be afraid to go after that and show the waste. And he said that as an English teacher, you want to set yourself up as kind of the devilish editor on their shoulder, so that they get to a point where when they're writing, your voice pops into their head going, hey, you really going to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, until that becomes their voice.
Right. Unconscious competence.
There we go.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. So the only way you can do that, teach in that way, that this guy's saying this is more effective, is to be really clear on what we're doing here in the first place.
100%.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If we're clear on we exist to help shape the affections of these souls,
Mm-hmm.
then we cannot be tied to we can't be tied to the means
Yeah.
as much as the ends.
Right.
Right? Yeah, that's great. That's great. What else, boys? I wasn't even there.
He had an interesting, and this is something this is more of a dialogue element, but he mentioned that a lot of times between lower school and upper school, a lot of the most effective community building elements of like a lower school elementary classroom as you transition into junior high can get lost. And so he said things like, things like a catechism, things like memorization, these things that are super key in the lower school elements. We just kind of, instead of continuing to build on them and still have some level of expectation of those, that they can actually be lost in upper school as they make the transition to rhetoric
Because they're not doing them.
because they're not doing them.
And okay, you have a thought on that?
I don't know. It was an interesting thought. But one piece that he mentioned, he used kind of like name tags as a gateway into this. But he said that he brought back, name tags for each student, like the desktop thing. And he said on there that he would put 3 things. He'd put first name, last name, and the church they belong to. And he talked through the significance of that, because it reminds your students, hey, first name, this is who you are. This is who God has made you. This is the identity that you have been given, and you have ownership of this education. You are representing yourself in my class. Last name, hey, you came from a family. They have taught you how to live, how to function, how to act. And if you're not acting in line with that, then you're bringing shame to your family. If you are acting in line with that, or even, if you're acting foolishly in class, then, hey, maybe your parents taught you to be like that. Right? And so that brings dishonor, or at least invites reproach on them. And then the church, the same kind of thing. Hey, your parents have hopefully brought you up in a Christian community. And if you're acting foolishly, if you're not living virtuously, if you're not, if you don't know scripture at all, if you're not making any effort, then you've failed your discipleship. Your parents might have failed your discipleship, and your church might be lacking in what it's called to as well.
Yeah, that's good, man. Yeah. So back to that piece about dropping some of these. We're talking about these elements,
Mhm.
right? Elements of the classroom. So we look at the younger students, and they do catechism. They do, call and response. They do chants and songs and things because of their stage of development.
Right.
They're really good at. They're sponges. Really good at just soaking this stuff up, right? And it's not that truth is any different than the truth we want a graduate to have. It's the fact that at these other stages, they can, next stage, understand this in a much deeper way,
Sure.
not just regurgitate it, and finally be able to argue for it.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's not that material ever changes. It's not that they ever need to not be asked, why are we at school today? Right? It's they need to continue to engage with those same elements in a deeper and richer way.
Right.
Right? Yeah. How you going to do that?
How am I going to do that?
Yeah.
I mean, figuring out the balance between kind of our approach to literature and theirs. But, yeah, I mean, I was really struck by, I haven't had a literature class, and it's been a minute, Like, I love reading. I love reading the great books. But as far as having somebody, on the outside teaching and expositing, it's been a while. And so just remembering kind of what that looks like externally, right? Having somebody to guide you through that and show, hey, like, this is an example of virtue in the text. These things that maybe I've learned to do unconsciously as I'm reading, but to bring that out, to guide students into doing that and showing the joy and the excitement of doing that, right? Instead of like, hey, we're going to do 50 chapters just for the sake of doing it, which, I mean, there's a time and a place for doing something hard just because it's hard.
Sure.
But also being able to show, hey, like, I mean, Jane Eyre books, right? Or Jane Austen books, sorry. They tend to show real life characters, right? Like, that was her whole thing, is showing maybe not exciting, dynamic characters, but people that anybody could look at and be like, oh yeah, hey, I know someone like that. I know someone like that. And so as you're going through something like Pride and Prejudice or Jane Eyre, to be able to slow it down and be like, hey, like, character progression, is this Are you a character like this? Are you the nagging mother? Are you the haughty, haughty student? Something like this? And what does that say about you? What does that say about your character? And then kind of turning from that, what does that look like to develop virtue, to repent of that, and to fall in line with, again, who you're called to be, who your parents have called you to be, and who your church is calling you to be.
That's good. That's good. You still got your notes out.
Well, I was just thinking. If we, Kevin's here on the ground, and we go up to 30,000 foot view. One of the sessions that I was at today talked about the importance of the upper level of leadership, specifically at the board level. And a lot of times with nonprofits, I've been part of different boards in my past and different kinds of boards, advisory boards, a governance board. Each one has sort of a different role to play. I think most classical Christian schools operate with some kind of a governance board or a strategic board, and talking about how important it is to have a unified vision among that upper level of leadership. And there was something that said, I don't know if there's a quote from somebody, but talking about that. So a lot of times I think that when you think about a board, it's like, what does a board even do? Like they're just the fancy pants back there calling the shots. But really, they're protectors of the vision, the mission.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones that it's like it's in their DNA. Like they bleed this stuff, or at least that's what you want.
Yeah.
And to have that unified vision. There was a quote of some sort said, speaking specifically of board of directors as members, is diversity of background is helpful. So to have people coming from different experiences, different walks of life, to come together on the board can be a helpful thing. I don't know if it's always helpful, but it can be helpful. Diversity of gifting is essential, so having different gifts of the body represented there on the board. But then what's essential, he says, diversity of mission or diversity of agenda is toxic. So if you have on that upper level a board that's unified, a board that's very clear about what we're trying to accomplish and is like 85% locked in about how we actually go about accomplishing, a healthy board's going to have, if you put a camera up in the room, you're going to see probably some good debate going on behind closed doors. But overall, they're locked in together on the mission, the vision. I think that's really helpful. I think that's something that will lead to a successful school or a successful organization in general, is having that vision guarded. So that was just something that stuck with me. And a lot of times that work, like fighting for that unity, isn't seen. But when it's not there, you'll experience it. You'll feel it, like all kinds of frays everywhere. Everything's sort of in shards and feels very disjointed. But when it's together, you've got that leadership. And I think this is something across wherever you have leadership over you, something to appreciate about whether it's pastors that are doing this work to fight for unity, whether it's a school board or a different sort of organization where you have men or women involved in this. That is a big deal. And if you are in an organization where that's unified, it's crystal clear, man, that's worth sticking around for and being part of.
Yeah, amen.
Because that'll get you a long way down the road.
That's good. That feels like a good cap.
It does. I'm ready for day 2.
All right. Hey, if I can convince these guys to get back on here, we'll do this every night.
Oh, yeah.
No, I just put the responsibility on you. Sweet.